The 2024 NFL Scouting Combine is officially over with, so today let's do our Mock Draft 3.0 presented by Underdog Fantasy. So with the Scouting Combine being over with, we now have some new players who could potentially move out into the first round. With that being said, this will be our first official mock draft with trades. And we are going to start off with the Chicago Bears. Of course, this seems to be the Caleb Williams pick. Now, Chicago Bears fans seem to still be a little bit split on what they want to do. I still think that Caleb Williams will be the pick here for the Chicago Bears and that Justin Fields will end up somewhere else. So that being said, Caleb Williams will be my first overall pick. Next up at number 2, we have the Washington Commanders. If you've not watched my Washington Commanders rebuild, I'll put it up at the very end of the video, so make sure you guys check that out. In the mock draft for their team, I did have them taking Drake May, so I'm going to stay consistent here. I think that Drake May is the better quarterback than Jaden Daniels. That could be a personal opinion. Some people are going to disagree with me. I don't think Jaden Daniels is as good as a lot of people think he is. That's not to say he's bad, but I just don't think he's better than Drake May. To me, this is really where things start to potentially get interesting. The New England Patriots have been in the market to potentially trade down from their pick, so I'm going to go ahead and try to find them a new trade partner. Now, for what team could potentially trade up to get him, I've been hearing a lot of rumors about the Minnesota Vikings, the Las Vegas Raiders, and the Denver Broncos. I think it'll be one of these teams. I think it might depend on what team can put together the best offer, but to me, the team that makes the most sense in this situation would actually be the Minnesota Vikings. So we're going to make a trade here with the Minnesota Vikings. We are going to be doing for this pick, I don't know exactly what the exact value would be. I know for a fact it would at least be 2 first-round picks. I would also imagine a second-round pick would also be involved in this trade as well. And I would also imagine that in this situation, the Minnesota Vikings would have to give up even more things considering how valued this third overall pick would be. I'm going to imagine that they'll probably throw in another pick like the 145 and even potentially a 4th-round pick next year. It does say that they are not interested in trading for this pick. I'm going to just force this trade. Minnesota's looking for their future quarterback of the future. Kirk Cousins will probably not be here. I've even heard that they are potentially interested in Trey Lance. And if that's the case, they're going to be pretty interested in moving up. They were really aggressive last year to get Anthony Richardson. I could definitely see them being interested in doing that again this year. Now for the Patriots side of things, yes, you're going to be missing out on a prospect like Jaden and even a Marvin Harrison Jr., which obviously definitely does suck. But for the Patriots' sake, it's a very loaded wide receiver class. So even if you can't get one of the top wide receivers or top quarterbacks, you could probably still go out there and get one of the top offensive linemen. So with that being said, we're going to force this trade here. The Minnesota Vikings will now be up at pick number 3, and I'm going to have them taking the quarterback out of LSU, Jaden Daniels. Jaden Daniels is going to bring in that dynamic pass thrower of the football that the Minnesota Vikings just don't have when Kirk Cousins is not there. Now, Kirk Cousins is a good quarterback, and I do think that they will stick with Kirk Cousins, but if for some reason Kirk is to go somewhere else, they might be in a desperate situation to go out there and trade up for a guy like Jaden Daniels or a guy like Trey Lance, we've heard. That now puts the Arizona Cardinals up on the block here. Now, this is a potential trade down situation for the Arizona Cardinals. In this certain spot, I don't see them trading down. Marvin Harrison Jr. is in their hands. They're going to take Marvin Harrison Jr. to give a dynamic pass catcher to Kyler Murray. Next up, we have the LA Chargers. Now, again, another spot where this team could potentially trade down. I definitely do think that is within the books of happening. As to what team would trade up, I would imagine a team like Denver, potentially the Falcons, the Raiders, if they don't have their quarterback situation figured out, they could potentially try to make a move up to get a guy like a JJ McCarthy. Now, before everyone says, Metro, JJ McCarthy's not a top 5 pick, I'm with you. I don't think he's a top 10 to even top 15 pick in this class, but teams need quarterbacks, and he's one of those young guys who's proven to be a talented player. However, with all that being said, I don't think the Chargers are going to move off of this spot. I think they'll stick here at pick number 5 and take the best offensive lineman in this year's class, Joe Alt. My one concern with Joe Alt is that he is a traditional left tackle, and you already have Rashawn Slater. I wonder if he will struggle at that right tackle spot, similar to how Penei Sewell kind of struggled early on, but then eventually, became that all-pro player. I kind of see him having a very similar path like a Penei Sewell. Next up, we have the Giants at pick number 6. Giants really need wide receiver help. I've been debating offensive line and wide receiver for this team. I've now kind of settled on the fact they should probably go wide receiver. I don't think they're going to move off of Daniel Jones, nor do I think they're going to move off of Evan Neal. So if you're not going to replace those guys, why not give them as much help as possible in getting a guy like a Rome Odunze or a Malik Neighbors or even a Brock Bowers? Now, Darren Waller is returning, so that does potentially take away the idea of taking a Brock Bowers, and I've debated the Rome Odunze versus Malik Neighbors thing for a while, and while I think that Rome Odunze is the better wide receiver, I think he's the second best receiver in this class, I actually think Malik Neighbors fits Daniel Jones' playstyle a little bit better. One thing that I can say about Daniel Jones is that he isn't one of those guys who's going to throw a bunch of deep balls, which is one of the best things about Rome Odunze. That is also one of the best things about Malik Neighbors, but Malik Neighbors also has that really good creative and explosiveness ability to make plays when he gets a screen or a quick slant or something along those lines. Next up, we have the Tennessee Titans, and I don't want to compare the Titans to the Cincinnati Bengals, but in a lot of ways, they're in a very similar spot that the Cincinnati Bengals were in just a few years back when they had the whole Penei Sewell versus Jamar Chase conversation. Now, in this situation, there isn't a top-tier tackle available on the board outside of J.C. Latham and Olu Fashanu. I think if Joe Alt was in this pick here, it's a little bit more interesting. But given that this team desperately needs some playmakers to give Will Levis some options, I'm actually going to go with Rome Odunze here. Traditionally, I've been giving them offensive linemen, and I still think that that is definitely the move that they will potentially make. But if you can't get a Joe Alt, a Rome Odunze sitting right there looks really good. Next up, we have the Atlanta Falcons at pick number 8. With the quarterback situation going on there, I do think that this is a landing spot for Justin Fields, who just got traded from the Chicago Bears, at least in this hypothetical situation. I've been doing this on basically all my mock drafts. I think that Justin Fields is just such a good fit for Atlanta that I'm going to assume that they've already addressed the quarterback spot. So assuming they've already addressed the quarterback spot, that does make things a little bit more interesting with this pick. You could definitely go for a guy like a Byron Murphy to fill in at the defensive interior pass rushing spot, or you can go for maybe the best pass rusher in the draft in Dallas Turner. I do think that that is what I'm going to do in this situation. Dallas Turner has some very good upside to be a very explosive pass rusher. I do think Jared Verse is my edge number 1, but I think when it comes down to it, I do think Dallas Turner will be the number 1 pick of the defensive players. You get a defensive coordinator to now be your head coach. I would be shocked if he was to go for an offensive player in the draft, especially with the way the board fell. I would love to see a Marvin Harrison or a Malik Neighbors or a Rome Odunze in Atlanta, but it just doesn't make sense. Now we're at pick number 9 with the Chicago Bears, and this is a tough spot for the Chicago Bears to be in because you are going to be missing out on the top 3 wide receivers. You're also going to be missing out on the top tackle in the class. Brock Bowers is available. And one thing I'll say about Brock Bowers is he's not just a tight end. He's a weapon. He's somebody who you could use in a lot of different ways. With that being said, though, would the Chicago Bears take a guy like Brock Bowers knowing they already have their tight end position filled? That to me is a very good question. Again, Brock Bowers isn't necessarily just your straight up tight end. I don't think they're going to do that, though. You already have a bit of a strength with Jalen Johnson. You already have Tyreek Stevenson on the roster, so do you go out there and potentially go for a guy like Quinion Mitchell? Maybe. In this situation with Dallas Turner being off the board, though, I really like the idea of giving an extra pass rusher inside the middle for the guy like Byron Murphy potentially. But because I think there's a ton of options for this team to go down here, I'm actually going to have them trade down in this situation. Now, what team could potentially be interested in moving up? I think the Denver Broncos would be a team that would be super aggressive in this situation. The Chicago Bears don't really need anybody here that couldn't be there at pick 12. For example, Brock Bowers could still be there at pick 12. So could a guy like Cooper DeJean or Quinion Mitchell or Byron Murphy or Jared Verse. So in this situation, I'm going to trade down with the Denver Broncos for the Denver Broncos to go out there and actually get a top tier quarterback that they so desperately want. Now, what would they have to give up? I don't think it would be too much. I think it would be their first and from seconds for the next couple years. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do a number 12 overall pick, the number 76 overall pick, and a future second round pick. Actually, we'll change it to a third round pick to be a bit more realistic for pick number 9 and pick number 111. That would give the Chicago Bears both pick number 75 and 76, by the way. So we're going to force this trade. The Chicago Bears now move down to pick 12, and the Denver Broncos now move up to pick 9. In this situation, the quarterback that's going to be taken off the board first will be JJ McCarthy. He's going to be the 4th quarterback of this draft to be taken, and I think this is a good spot for the Denver Broncos to get their quarterback. They don't have Russell Wilson no more. I also don't think they're going to be super aggressive in the offseason to get a guy like a Kirk Cousins or a Justin Fields. So their best option is to go out there and get a developmental guy like a JJ McCarthy, even though I think Bo Nix is just as good as a fit in that system. I like McCarthy's upside more. And with teams like Las Vegas and potentially a team like New Orleans and Seattle also interested in quarterbacks, Denver could be in a situation where they want to guarantee they get their guy, and it really wouldn't cost them all that much. So in that situation, JJ McCarthy to the Chicago Bears. At pick number 10, the New York Jets are in a tough spot. You can go for a weapon like Brock Bowers to give Aaron Rodgers another piece in this offense, which, by the way, they desperately need to do, or they need to look to address the offensive line. They really need to replace both their tackle spots, and they could definitely use some help on the interior as well. I'm going to go with the best pass blocking offensive lineman, in my opinion, of the class, and in my opinion, that is Olu Fashanu of Penn State. He needs needs to work on his run blocking stuff and just some inconsistencies, but when it comes to pass blocking, he has the highest upside of any of these guys, maybe outside of Joe Alt. This is going to be a young blindside protector for Aaron Rodgers and whoever the future quarterback will be for the New York Jets. Now the Patriots are back up, and with the new release of Jonnu Smith, Brock Bowers makes a ton of sense here. They don't have a quarterback on the roster quite yet, which is concerning, but to be honest with you, and I hate to say this, I kind of get the vibe and feel Mac Jones could be the quarterback next year. I know that's a bit crazy, and I know that sounds a bit silly, but Mac Jones was once a Pro Bowl quarterback in just his rookie year, and for them to give up so quickly on him when they spent a first-round pick on him just a few years ago is a bit questionable. Now, I understand that Mac Jones doesn't have the upside of a guy like a Michael Penix Jr. or even a Jaden Daniels that we could have taken at pick 3, but given the fact that you've moved down and your offense basically needs a bit of everything, I don't think you go for a quarterback in this situation. You need receivers, you need tight ends, you need offensive linemen. Brock Bowers is right here and he can fill in a lot of your problems. I know you have Hunter Henry, who's a good tight end, but he's not the player that Brock Bowers is. New England getting Brock Bowers would be a very good fit, especially with Jonnu Smith not being on the roster no more. Next up, we have the Chicago Bears, who traded down from pick 9 to pick 12, and they now position themselves to take anybody that they really want. They can go on the defensive side of things, or they can go for an offensive tackle. In this situation, you've already taken Caleb Williams. Maybe you want to go wide receiver like a Brian Thomas or an Adonai Mitchell, who had fantastic combines. But with that being said, I'm going to go with, in my opinion, the most interesting player of the draft, and that's going to be Quinion Mitchell out of Toledo, the cornerback. This is going to give a second cornerback to add to this roster to really just dominate opposing teams. When you're going up against the Justin Jeffersons and Jordan Addisons of your division, why not get one of the highest upside corners of the draft in Quinion Mitchell? Quinion Mitchell also doesn't have to be thrusted into a cornerback one spot. He can develop as that number 2 option alongside Jalen Johnson. Next up, the Raiders at pick number 13. I think I'm going to have to work under the assumption that they've already addressed the quarterback spot. With Kirk Cousins being on a different team, hypothetically, I could see the Raiders being a team that would want to go out there and get him. The offensive line could use some work, especially at one of their tackle spots. Obviously, one of those spots is filled. Maybe you go somewhere with that. I could also see them going for a guy like Byron Murphy to give even more strength to this defensive line alongside Tyree Wilson, Max Crosby. So in this situation, Byron Murphy to me makes a ton of sense here to add to the Las Vegas Raiders. He's a super explosive defensive tackle who can do a lot of really good things. Next up at pick number 14, the New Orleans Saints have a lot of question marks, but with their quarterback room, their offensive line, and they could even use some weapons on the outside. With the way the board has fallen, I really like the idea of taking a guy like Talis Fuaga, who I thought was a very good performer at the draft combine. I thought he had a very good day. You could also go for a guy like JC Latham, who is all over the board on most mock drafts. I've seen him go as high as number 5 and as low as pick 30. So it's gonna be very interesting to see what team decides to take him. For me, Talis Fuaga had a really good day at the draft combine, so I'm more tempted to go with him. It's more of a fit there with the New Orleans Saints, who are a bit different than a lot of other teams. I can even see Graham Barton being the pick here because there seems to be a type that the New Orleans Saints just love to have. In this situation, I am going to go with Talis Fuaga, though. I thought he had a very good scouting combine. Not saying JC Latham did not, but that's just my personal opinion. Next up with pick number 15, the Indianapolis Colts really need to look to find another cornerback on their roster. So in this situation, you have a ton of different options. Cooper DeJean, Nate Wiggins, Taron Arnold, and Kool-Aid McKinstry are all first round caliber guys. My personal opinion of the 4 guys here, I think Cooper DeJean is the best. However, he doesn't really fit the profile of freak athletes that the Indianapolis Colts typically go for. Nate Wiggins is that freak athlete, but he also is super skinny and just kind of injured himself at the combine. He should be healthy for obviously camp and the regular season, but that is a bit concerning. Cooper DeJean does present some different abilities as a versatile player that a Nate Wiggins or a Taron Arnold does not. So in this situation, given how the Colts have traditionally drafted, I'm going to go with Nate Wiggins as an upside athletic cornerback to add to this roster. From Clemson, Indianapolis, that makes a lot of sense to me. Next up, we have the Seattle Seahawks, who really could use a lot of help on the interior of their offensive line. You have a guy like Jackson Powers-Johnson who can play the center or even either one of the guards. That would definitely help a big need for them. This is a defense, however, that really does need to address their run stuffing core. And in that situation, Jared Verse might be one of the best guys available. I also think Laiatu Latu makes a lot of sense here, but I thought Jared Verse stole the show a little bit from Laiatu Latu at the draft combine, so that put him a little bit higher on my personal list. It'll be interesting to see how different staffs feel about Jared Verse versus Laiatu Latu. I'm gonna go with Jared Verse here. That seems to be a pick that I keep coming back to for the Seattle Seahawks. At pick number 17, we have the Jacksonville Jaguars. They really need to look to protect Trevor Lawrence as best as possible. Jackson Powers-Johnson makes a ton of sense to fill in that interior spot. They also could look in the secondary. A guy like Cooper DeJean or Taron Arnold could be the Jalen Ramsey that this team has desperately needed for quite some time. They could also use something in the edge department. department, but I think Trayvon Walker is going to develop into somebody pretty nice there. So I'm a bit tempted to take Jackson Powers-Johnson, but given the need of secondary help this defense just really needs, I'm going to go with Terrion Arnold here. He to me seems more of that Jalen Ramsey type of guy. Coming from Alabama, a big name school, I don't really love Terrion Arnold more than I love Cooper DeJean, but in this situation, I think Terrion Arnold is a better fit for a team like Jacksonville and what they precisely need. Next up, the Cincinnati Bengals, they really need to look to protect Joe Burrow as best as possible. J.C. Latham is still available, and I think that makes the most sense. I think J.C. Latham is a really good offensive tackle prospect. He could play opposite of a guy like Orlando Brown, who's going to be that left tackle. J.C. Latham can stick at right tackle and be a dominant run stuffer to go along with a solid pass protector for Joe Burrow. Next up, the LA Rams at pick number 19. Again, secondary is a big need for them. They could also look to beef up the defensive line even more with a guy like Laiatu Latu. They could also even look to continue to protect Matthew Stafford by going out there and getting a Troy Fautanu or a Jackson Powers-Johnson. In this situation, I'm going to go with Cooper DeJean out of Iowa as filling a position of need that was overperforming last year because of what Raheem Morris brought to that defense. Cooper DeJean isn't, in my opinion, the best schematic fit for this team. I don't know exactly how to word it. He just doesn't really feel like an LA Ram, but he is, in my opinion, the best corner still on the board who also has versatility to play that safety position, which they don't really need, but they could potentially use that at some point if injuries are to occur. Next up at pick number 20, Kenny Pickett is still going to be the quarterback, and I've sort of acknowledged that idea the past couple months. Is this a trade down spot for them? Maybe. I don't see that really being the case here. I think that Pittsburgh's in a situation where the board has fallen pretty nicely for them. They can either go with Jackson Powers-Johnson, Amarius Mims, Graham Barton, or Troy Fautanu. They really could use center and interior offensive line help. I think Jackson Powers-Johnson makes the most sense as a natural Pittsburgh Steeler fit. He also just feels like a Pittsburgh Steeler at heart. He kind of has that cultural identity. Now, with the way the board has fallen here, the Miami Dolphins desperately need to go offensive line here to continue to protect Tua and that dynamic offense. I like Troy Fautanu here as somebody who can play tackle, can play guard. I wouldn't even be surprised if he can play center. Now, you're not going to put him at center, but this is an offensive line that's going to have a ton of holes. Troy Fautanu can be a plug-in at a certain spot that wherever you need him to be at. So for me, Troy Fautanu makes the most sense to the Miami Dolphins. Now at pick number 22, there's been a couple guys who I would have loved to have taken a little bit earlier in the draft, mainly Brian Thomas, Adonai Mitchell, and Laiatu Latu, but just haven't really found a spot for them given the way the board has fallen. With Philadelphia desperately needing some linebackers, some safeties, and some defensive backs, this is a tough spot here. Peyton Wilson was the best performer at the draft combine, in my opinion, at the linebacker position. However, I don't really know if he's the best fit for Philadelphia. Philadelphia does put a lot of their pressure on their linebackers to be very good in coverage and very good as tackle bodies, and Peyton Wilson can definitely fill that, but do you take him at pick 22? That is a bit interesting in this situation. I could definitely see it. Again, linebacker is a huge need for a lot of these teams down the board here, mainly Dallas and Philadelphia, two NFC East components or opponents. You could even take a guy like Laiatu Latu, who could be the replacement for Hassan Reddick, who seems to be leaving at this point. Now, maybe you trust a guy in Nolan Smith to take the next step and be that replacement. Maybe you trust guys like Josh Sweat and some of those other guys, but I don't know if any of those guys have the upside of a Hassan Reddick, whereas Laiatu Latu could be that guy. I just think there's bigger needs here for the Philadelphia Eagles. And in this situation, I kind of like Peyton Wilson here to the Philadelphia Eagles as a piece to add to this linebacking core that really just needs some complete renovations. He's a little bit undersized at 6'4", 238. Definitely not short by any means. Good tackler, good in coverage. I want to go Kool-Aid McKinstry here for them, but I'm going to go with Peyton Wilson to really bring in a nice body in that linebacking room. I was considering him for Dallas, but I think he's a good fit here for the Philadelphia Eagles. Maybe a little bit early and not a prototypical Philadelphia Eagles move, because they typically like to go for bigger schools like Georgia and Alabama and Oklahoma and whatnot, but in this situation, they need to fill in that linebacking spot desperately. Peyton Wilson could be that guy. Houston at pick number 23 is very interesting. I like the idea of adding Jerzon Newton to bring in a new body into that defensive line room. They just re-signed Dalton Schultz on a 3-year deal. I actually just made a video on the Houston Texans and I have to scrap the whole video because I told them to bring in Dalton Schultz on a 3-year $30 million deal and not a $36 million deal. So we're going to be redoing that video. I guess I'm giving you guys a hint as to what's to come pretty soon. Houston Texans in this situation, getting a guy like a Jerzon Newton or even a Laiatu Latu makes a ton of sense. The offensive line is already kind of set for the most part. You could bring in a guy like a Graham Barton to play center, but I don't love the idea of moving him from tackle to center. That's just such a weird thing to do, even though there's been guys like Connor Williams who used to play tackle at Texas and now plays center for the Miami Dolphins. In this situation, I'm going to go with Jerzon Newton. I don't think Chris Jones is coming to Houston. I just hate to break it to you Houston Texans fans. I don't see it. Jer'Zhan Newton has some really good pass rushing upside alongside guys like Will Anderson Jr. Next up, the Dallas Cowboys at pick number 24. This is a tough spot. I do think that Tyler Smith is going to move back out to left tackle, so that does potentially open you up to fill in at that left guard spot. If you look at all the interior offensive linemen at this point, you're not taking any of them at pick 24. Now, Dallas has done some quirky things like taking Mozzie Smith, who I thought was a second to third round pick last year, late in the back end of the first round. I think it turned out that there are other teams interested in him as well. And then a few years back, they took Tyler Smith, who was a consensus second or third round pick, who they took in the first round. That worked out for them. Wouldn't be shocked here if a guy like a Christian Haynes or a Zach Frazier was taken early. With Dallas needing to fill in a lot of spots along the offensive line, I think you go with the most versatile guy here, somebody who you trust to play tackle, to play guard, to play even center in Graham Barton. I don't think he's better than Amarius Mims by any means, but Dallas doesn't need a right tackle as much as they need a left guard or left tackle or even a center at this point. Graham Barton could be that fill-in guy. Now we move on to the Green Bay Packers now. Offensive line is definitely at play here with Amarius Mims being available. Mims has been playing that right tackle spot, which don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure that Zach Tom has been playing a lot of that right tackle spot too. So be interesting to see if he can mature to go that left tackle spot, both Amarius Mims and even Zach. I think offensive line has to be in play here with a lot of the older guys in the Green Bay Packers offensive line moving on, David Bakhtiari, so on and so forth. I think that this is a spot for Amarius Mims here to go in at right tackle, and maybe you move Zach Tom to left, or maybe it's already a natural fit in its own way. I would love for Laiatu Latu to be taken at this point, but Amarius Mims to Green Bay makes a lot of sense here. You'll notice towards the back end of the first round, there's not as many trades. To me, there just isn't many teams that I could realistically see making that big trade for a player. So I don't think there's anything out there that I can necessarily make a trade for. Could a team like Carolina move up to take a Brian Thomas Jr.? Maybe. In fact, that is actually a bit interesting, but they're at pick 33, so it's not that big of a move. Mike Evans just re-signed at Tampa Bay, so they don't need to address that position. More than anything, they really could use a new edge rusher, as a guy like Shaq Barrett is not being brought back. Laiatu Latu being here at pick 26 is not very realistic, but would be a very good landing spot for him to go to. He'd be a day one starter and would bring a lot of versatility into that edge rushing room. I am now over here so you guys can see the rest of the board. The Arizona Cardinals have their second pick at pick number 27. This is a team that already addressed the receiving room with Marvin Harrison Jr. I'm somewhat tempted to just double down and take Brian Thomas or Adonai Mitchell as sort of a fun pick for the both of us, but I don't see that being very realistic. In this situation, they need to look to continue to build in the secondary. They've had some secondary problems over the past couple years. Kool-Aid McKinstry being here makes a ton of sense for them. He could be that big body corner who can do a lot of really good things. He's also physical in the run game, which is very important in today's game. I think he makes a lot of sense there. Buffalo at pick number 28. This is a team that could really use a wide receiver weapon. I think you really want to ideally find that outside guy with Stephon Diggs, and you can also have Khalil Shakir continue to play at that slot position. Brian Thomas to me is a very good option. I prefer Adonai Mitchell personally speaking, but I don't think he's a good fit for Buffalo with what they need. Brian Thomas would be that guy who can really stretch the field vertically. Pick number 29 belongs to the Detroit Lions. Interior offensive line is a big need for them, as they have a couple guys who are potentially leaving. That being said, I don't think you take Zach Frazier because you don't need a center. Jordan Morgan is very interesting here, as he's somebody who I do project will move to guard. I think 90% of people are going to tell you that. Tyler Guyton isn't going to move to guard. He's too big. Kingsley isn't going to move either. Kieran is obviously not going to take him at the back end at the first round. You could also go into the secondary here for a guy like Ennis Rakestra or Kamari Lassiter. Those make some sense too, but I also love the idea of another pass rusher alongside Aiden Hutchinson. Now, do you go in at the defensive tackle spot, which is a position of need for them as well, and get a guy like Braden Fisk, who had one of the best draft combines I've seen from a defensive tackle in quite some time? You could potentially do that. There's also guys like Chop Robinson, Darius Robinson, Adisa Isaac, Braylon Trice, Austin Booker, who all could be a spot here for them. I've sort of talked myself into it. Braden Fisk as a dominant pass rusher to add alongside Aiden Hutchinson, to me, makes a lot of sense. I think he could be that second round guy who sneaks into the first round, surprisingly. Pick number 30 is the Baltimore Ravens. They could really use a wide receiver alongside Zay Flowers. I don't expect Odell Beckham to be, he might be back, but I don't think he's going to be the Odell Beckham of the old. I think you just kind of need to find somebody who can get open consistently alongside Zay Flowers. Now, Ed McConkey makes sense, but he kind of plays similarly similarly in some ways to Zay Flowers with the role he's going to play in Baltimore. I do think a guy like Justin Matabuke will return, so getting a defensive tackle isn't the biggest need. Could you find your replacement for Patrick Queen? I suspect he's gone, maybe, but in this situation, I think going for a guy like Adrian Cooper or Junior Colson or any of these guys is a little bit rich right now for my personal taste. I think you could probably wait to the back end of the second round or even the third round to get one of those linebackers. So in this situation, I'm gonna go with Adonai Mitchell to be that wide receiver 2/1 alongside Zay Flowers to give Lamar Jackson more weapons along this offense. Next up at pick number 31, the San Francisco 49ers are on the board. They desperately need to get some offensive lineman who can play alongside Trent Williams. Oklahoma ties Trent Williams. Oklahoma ties Tyler Guyton. I think it's a match made in heaven. He doesn't have the versatility of a guy like Jordan Morgan, but I think his upside as that future right tackle makes a ton of sense. So I'm going to go with Tyler Guyton here to be trained by Trent Williams. And the last pick of the first round belongs to the Kansas City Chiefs. I've been making this pick on a lot of the mock drafts that I've been doing personally. Ladd McConkey. He just seems to me like the perfect fit alongside a guy like Travis Kelce and Patrick Mahomes. Somebody who can just get open. You put him alongside guys like Rashee Rice and maybe another big body wide receiver, it makes sense to me. Sure, you could go for a guy like a Troy Franklin or a Keon Coleman or a Roman Wilson, but Ladd McConkey just finds ways to get open, and I think he makes a ton of sense here to the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, before I actually make that selection, I want to briefly talk about the Carolina Panthers, who have the 33rd pick. In that situation, I think that Roman Wilson and Keon Coleman would probably be the pick there. Ideally, I think Ladd McConkey is the better fit for the Carolina Panthers as somebody who can just find ways to get open, but Ladd McConkey makes so much sense with his 4.3 speed, by the way, to fill in a big hole for the Kansas City Chiefs. All right, so this is our full mock draft. You guys tell me in the comment section below what picks you guys agree with, what picks you guys disagree with. I try to mix things up with this draft. I didn't want to just take the same players in every single mock draft. So if you guys want to see a different mock draft that I've done, I'll have it pinned up right now. And of course, check out that Washington video that I have shown up as well. But I love you guys. Peace.